This is task 1H, part 1. You've created the basics of a new booking form, and we're now going to look at adding these items of data here for the booking ID, booking date, payment due, and the church drop-down box. So we're going to have a look at these. We'll start with the first one, which the easiest one, which is that we're going to have the date of order is going to be today's date. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start by creating ourselves a bit more space that we can work with. And we're going to create a new text box for the booking date, like this. And I'm going to call that, it hasn't done it quite the way I wanted to, let's try again. So we'll do a new text box, and we'll call this booking date over here. And then we need to set it to be today's date. So I just put equals date, open bracket, close bracket, and that will put whatever today's date is in there. Now we also need to give it a name because we're going to need to make reference to this when we save the data. When we process a booking, this data is going to be saved to the booking table. And at the moment, if we have a look at this, in its properties, we go to all, just called text 6. That isn't very useful to us, so I'm going to call this new booking date. And now I'll be able to make good reference to that. So let's look at the next text box, which is going to be the payment due date being 14 days after today's date. So I'm going to create another text box, and this one I'm going to call payment due. And I'm going to name it again like I did the last one. Instead of text 8, I'm going to call this new payment due. And what we're going to do is we need to add 14 days to today's date. So it's going to be equal to, we're adding to a date, so it's date add. We're adding days, so we put D in speech marks. The next is how many days, is going to be 14. Next is what we're going to add it to, we're going to add it to today's date, and we need to close the brackets for date add. Let's have a look at how this is working so far. There we go, we've got today's date, that's the date I'm doing this recording, and the payment date, which is 14 days after. So go back to design view. We've now got the booking ID to do. So we'll create another text box, and we're going to call that booking ID. And I'm going to name it. Again, let's use something appropriate instead of just text 10. So I'm going to call this new booking ID. And now it's about what goes in here. Now what we need to do is we need to look up what the current bookings are. So we need to look up in this booking table, and we need to find out what is the largest number that's been used so far, which is, in this case, we can see is 10, and then add 1 to it. So to find 10, it's the maximum number that's been used. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a function called dmax. That will look at the maximum value in a table. So I open the brackets. I now have to say, what is it that I'm going to look up? I'm going to be looking up the booking ID. So booking ID, close the square brackets, close the speech marks. Where am I going to be looking at it from? It's going to be from the booking table, and then I want to add 1 to it. So let's just clarify exactly what this is going to do again, and then we'll have a look at it in action. It's going to add 1 to whatever it finds from this dmax function. It's looking in the booking table, and it's going to look at the booking ID and find out whatever the maximum of the current booking ID is. So we're expecting that to be 11, as we saw a moment ago. Let's have a look. There we go. It's added a booking ID there for us of 11. So finally, we need a drop-down box that is going to find the church for us, so we can select the church. So let's go to a drop-down box here. Add this on. We want it to find values in another table, and we need to say which table is it we're going to use. We're going to use the church table. We've got to decide which fields. Church ID, church name, postcode is usually enough to identify the church. Click on next. We'll leave the ID showing, so we'll put that on there. We'll make this wider so that when we change to house style, it will all fit in. otherwise you've got to fiddle around afterwards. It's a church ID that we want to gather. We want to get the church ID from that table. So we'll do that. Now we can't store it in anything. We've got nothing to store it in. Although we've got the booking table and we're based on this booking table, we don't want to actually store it into the booking table itself. So we want to remember the value for later use, and we can then store it when we do an append query and add the data to the booking table. So we're just going to remember whatever we decide. What am I going to call it? Okay, well, I'm just going to call it church, as it is here. Click on finish, and there it is, it's set up for us. But I need to name it because I'm going to need it later on. So I'm going to name this as new church ID because that's what it's going to get for us. Let's see how this is working so far. So I'll click on view. There we go, and I can choose a church, and that's my booking part of this form working. What we'll now need to have a look at is the pitch allocations and how that's going to work. And don't worry about the fact this isn't storing anything to a table yet. That will come in part 3 after you click on the process booking button.